telling our stories to telling our stories tonight. Our presenter is Manuel Hinojosa, and he'll be talking about De Colores, and I have to read it again. Understanding the history of color in a border region. And I'd like to present to you Mr. Hinojosa.
Oh, excuse me.
Thank you, Ed. It's always a pleasure being here and talking a little bit about some of the interests that I have. You're probably wondering why this subject, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that everyone knows I like history, and the history started when I was a kid. Probably had to do with the fact that I would go to a ranch that was in Mexico, and my dad would take us every weekend. It was an old heirloom, a ranch that we had had from the family for a long time. And this ranch was outside of Mier, and we used to go to this place, and we'd hunt arrowheads and do all kinds of things. On the way over there, we'd go through the town, and there was always these colors on these buildings that you don't have today, by the way. It seemed like Mier took the direction, said, let's paint it all white, and so we can attract the tourists. And they lost all those beautiful colors that they had on the buildings. And so, you know, I was always wondering, why are these colors? Why are these colors in this town, this very colonial town that was established in the 1750s? And then after that, my dad took me, of course, he took me to an art teacher, and she showed me colors and all of these things. So I started picking up on understanding, you know, how colors and what kind of colors to use. And then we ended up, you know, going and studying a little bit more about building and construction, which I do right now. But again, the understanding of this color, people, and I heard this from Valerie yesterday, and it was the same kind of a comment that's been made, you know, all along. Is I thought the reason these buildings were painted this color is because someone went to Sherwin-Williams and picked out these bright colors and put them on the wall. And you know, and you hear that so much. I even heard it from experts. Oh yeah, they were doing the downtown area in Westlake when they said, yeah, we went to the other side, to the Mexican side, and we went and saw some colors there. So we went to Sherwin-Williams and picked out colors. Well, I think it's a little bit more than that. That's what I really want to talk about tonight. You know, it's a subject probably that has a long, you know, a long history to it, and it's very interesting. And what I want to do is show you a map of Mexico. There's in a lot of the things that happen here, there's always a trail. There's always a path one takes. There's an origin and there's a destination. And actually what I'm talking about right now is this path. And this path really started in central Mexico. And in the path ended up and went back, came in through the areas here that are shown in San Luis Potosí, Monterrey, and ended up here in the valley. That's the path. There was other paths. There were Camino Reales that ended up in New Mexico. This is how things in the last 500 years have traveled, and how culture in a lot of ways has been able to be interpreted many different ways in different periods, and there was always that migration to the north. Now, one of the things that I also want to bring up in the beginning, because it's important that we understand this, is that there was a line here before Columbus, actually before Cortez came into Mexico, and this is what they call a Mesoamerican line, which meant that the indigenous population below that was very much civilized. They had cities, and they had architecture, and they had a lot of the cultural things, whereas anything above that was very nomadic. You didn't have that kind of, you know, populations. You know, Mexico City, when Cortez saw Mexico City, they had about 1 million people living in one community. And you know, and that's just not something that happens overnight. And it's a planning type of thing. And I think that it's important to understand how this path and this destination takes place. I have this picture here because I want to talk about some of an orientation item. And this item, what you're looking at right now is a Kickapoo hut. It's in Mexico. And Kickapoos, you know, Carolinas. That's a tribe that ended up in Mexico simply because they were contracted by the government at the Mexican War. And I spent 3 or 4 days there with them, and they told me all about their culture, and it was very, very interesting. But what's important here was that I saw a similarity in this culture and the Mexican culture. And this, for example, the huts, this is the tradition. This has been done for 1,000 years, you know. It hasn't changed, this actual orientation, the construction of the hut as well as the orientation. But what was really interesting about this is that these were oriented east to west. Sun comes up, sun goes down. And all the functions in this house having to do with that were very important, in that they're very similar to the same kind of customs that had occurred in the indigenous population in Mexico in Mesoamerican times or pre-Columbian times. And what I'm talking about a lot is for instance, in the Mayan culture, and I'm going to be talking. There's so many different pockets of civilizations in Mexico, and especially you talk about the Mayan, the Toltec, the Tarascans, the Otomis, the Tlaxcalans, the Totonacs. All these different have very similar type of cultures, including language. And they also had a way of also interpreting what they have. In this case, what I wanted to show you here is that this is a model of the Tajín, which is a Totonac. It's in the Tampico area. And notice the colors that we're starting to come out with. These are, now you look at the buildings, they don't have any color. But that plastic integration of color, or the method that they use, was something, there was a reason to it. It establishes the colors that I'm going to be start to talk about. And of course, in the Aztec world, you know, we have the introduction of colors. Colors was something that was you can see a lot in the customs that were also introduced and continue to see today, and on this path that I'm talking about. And it a lot had to do with symbolism too. Right here I show this is a picture that shows the Aztecs coming to the island. You can see the eagle with the serpent. It's going to land on a cactus, and you have a beginning with Tenochtitlan, which is the city of Mexico, where Mexico City was built on. But it starts showing you how some things also are identified by the symbolism, just like the flag itself. And you have again how Mexico started to become an identity, forming a nation. As a matter of fact, the flag itself, as you can see here, is one where it has 3 colors. Even the symbolism there: the red, unity; the green is hope; and the white is purity. And these colors also have a definite meaning and are going to be introduced. This is the Tres Garantia, which established the colors in 1821 when after their independence from Spain. And of course, the conquest of Mexico, which was 500 years ago, well, less than 500 years ago, and involving Cortés, and you can see how when he was introduced to the Aztec community, how colorful and everything the costumes were. As a matter of fact, this community I mentioned, about 1 million people, was very well organized. I mean, you could literally eat off the streets. It was just so well organized. I mean, the social structure there was very much developed and was working. One of the things too that's important to note here is that when Cortés came in, they say, the figures are, there was probably about close to 30 million people in Mexico. Okay. By 1610, 1620, it dwindled to 1 million of the native population. Of course, a lot of people died of disease, a lot of different reasons, and so you had a philosophy. This is the picture of Cortés. At that point, the Spanish conquered Mexico, and they wanted to bring up their customs, their way of life. In the Indian population, in turn, then was also introduced to a lot of the ways of the Spanish culture, including the religion. Religion was one of the things that was brought out, and there had to have been a bridge between the old, what was there before, and what the new was coming. As a matter of fact, there was a resistance from the local population. The resistance, came back, and color alone, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, is that the Spanish believed that everything should be white. White is pure, white is wealth, everything else. The Indians said, no, color is wealth. Color is important. And so there had to have been a visual bridge, an emotional bridge between that in order to continue. And so the Spanish really had a lot of trouble with that. And right here, what you see is this is a Tlaxcalteca Indian, which was an ally of Cortés. As a matter of fact, Cortés allowed them to continue uninterrupted as far as maintain their culture and their customs outside of Mexico City, while annihilated the Aztec civilization. Some of the others were allowed to flourish. But one of the major things that caused this to happen a little bit better was, and this is Juan Diego. Juan Diego, when his appearance with Virgin Mary, when there was a connection at that point, said, you know what? This is one of our guys, and he had an appearance. He had something happen to him. So I mean, immediately, hundreds of thousands of people became Christianized. They all joined in and said, you know what? This is what it's all about. The only thing that happened, again, on this bridge, there was a lot of things that needed to happen. One thing is there had to be an association. That is the moon goddess of the Aztecs. Okay, and the moon goddess was a connection. Say, okay, moon goddess, Virgin Mary. Okay. What's the other one? Jesus. You know, and they had the sun, the god of sun. They had the merchant, which was. Who's the merchant god? The merchant god was it wasn't Saint Michael. It was Saint James, and then you had the other was Saint Michael. So they all had a connection. They all said, okay, that's the saint. This is our god, and so there was a connection. So what happened with them? Everyone also had a color. I mean, Jesus was the Son of God, so it was a golden color. So gold was associated with him. So everything represented gold, and then red at the same time represented, Saint Michael's, and then black would represent the merchant god. So everybody had a connection. There was a connection there of color. So what you had happening was this association ended up something where the Spanish had to. They saw a markability, and then also on top of that, all the different colors available added to this markability. The flowers, the parrots, it was a place of color. The indigenous population was in love with color. Color was something that people didn't know. And then the community of religion, like the church and like the cemetery, was one also where you're going to bring a lot of color out. That's why when you see on Day of the Dead, you see all these colors, because color association with their connection with the saints and with religion was very important. The flower part in Xochimilco, you can see how this an old culture came about and brought in the different uses of color and allowed that to be more a recreational area, and using the old floating garden Xochimilco. What came out of these things with color was, from the flowers, you could actually come back in and make dyes from these colors. And these bright colors were something that could be introduced into the fabric, into the textiles. Well, one of the colors that was really hard to get was a red color, and how did you get a red color? Yeah. Well, there was an insect called coconil that grew on a nopal, and this nopal was a way where there were white little balls that they could grind up and make a powdery form and get this red dye. Well, red was a color that, to tell you the truth, most of Europe hadn't really seen, and so it was a big demand. One of the ships that was wrecked outside of 1554 shipwreck had a big cargo with this coconil. It was as good as gold. This was a real popular thing that, even till days after or years after, that's how they would get these the English, the Royal Guard would have these red coats, and because of now they had the ability to get this scarlet red color. As a matter of fact, the Tlaxcaltecas, which I showed you a little bit earlier, that were allowed to prosper, all they would have grown was cactus. And until 1550, the government says that's enough, no more cactus, because they were selling all of this dye to across into the New World and making a lot of money. They were becoming very wealthy because of this red dye. And as a matter of fact, this continued on. It was brought down this path into northern Mexico, and there's a count in Berlandier's work where he talks about the plantations of Poconil in northern Mexico. And that was something that was introduced into the area. Right here I'm showing you the China Poblana, and the reason I'm showing you because you can see how there was always influences along with this color. And what's interesting about this story, and I'll tell you a little bit about this, is this is China Poblana. A lot of the legend goes that she wasn't. There was a slave that ended up in Puebla, and she was not Chinese, by the way. She happened to be Hindu or Indian, and back in the 1620s, and when she died, she was very much of a prophet. That 200 years later, because she could really embroider and do some nice work, her styles, and it came up into a Mexican costume called the China Poblana, which is very popular in Mexico. But it shows how the different influences in Mexico took place and how the colors, again, were promoted in the different costumes, and in different regions had their own. And in order to accomplish this, you had to have the right dyes and you know, the styles. Everybody adopted someone, so everybody was like competing in how you wanted to do this. One of when I'm talking about the path, and this is a real important thing. A lot of times we don't know about it, we don't talk about it because it's something that probably needs a little bit more research. Earlier, I was talking about this era here in Mexico City. In Mexico, keep in mind when Cortés conquered Mexico, they set up cities. A city was Spanish, a pueblo was Indian, okay? Or a villa was a Spanish population. And the Spanish lived in Spanish areas, and the Indians lived in Pueblo areas. It was simple as that. And the main ones were Veracruz, Puebla, Mexico, and Guadalajara. That was it. Nobody really worked out in the post-conquest years, the first 16th century. That's what you had going. Well, since Tlaxcaltecas helped Cortés conquer the Aztecs because they hated the Aztecs, he said, okay, I'm going to set you a little town called Tlaxcala. You're going to set up right here, and I'm going to bring in all the universities, teach you everything about the European customs, and you're going to prosper. And they did, but they were involved in the agriculture. They couldn't care less about ranching or anything like that. And they in turn were given all the rights of the Don, and including the title of Don. When Cortés died, then the bet was off. Okay, now you guys, you got to perform. You got to do tributes. We want so much. We got so much corn that needs to be taken to Mexico City, and then you got to build this big cathedral in Puebla, because Puebla was right next door, and Puebla was for the Spanish. So they had this tribute that lasted 50 years to build this cathedral. And so there was this burden on the people of this town that were promised everything for Cortés. Well, towards the end of the 16th century, the Spanish didn't really care about arts. They didn't care about architecture. There was really not much going on their part. They wanted gold and silver, and they were going north because that's where everything was at. But when they were going north, they were meeting all the Indians, the Chichimecas. I mean, they were nomadic tribes. They were not going to be civilized. They were just not they were not taking the word of God. You know, they just didn't want it. And so they said, you know what, we're going to work out a deal with the Tlaxcaltecas. If you guys go up there and colonize northern Mexico, we'll give you the land, but more important, all your family that stays in Tlaxcalteca will be forgiven for 10 years. They don't have any more tributes to deal with. So in 1590, 200 families took off and settled about 10 different colonies. The main colony that I want to talk about is Saltillo. Saltillo was just having a lot of trouble. It had been started in 1580. The population was about gone. There was the Portuguese Del Canto and his group, and Montemayor were there. Montemayor later went to Monterrey, and they just couldn't keep up with the Indians' attacks. So they were brought in, and at that point, you had the culture being spread up north. The colonizers, which were these Tlaxcaltecas, and you know, and what happened since then, a lot of the ancestry that happens in northern Mexico is from these roots of Tlaxcalteca. What does that mean? That these, since they didn't like, they called ganado menor, which is your sheep, your goats. You know, they didn't really care about cattle. Cattle destroy their crops. They decided they didn't like the beef, and that was for the Spanish. Spanish wanted wheat and beef. They wanted corn and small game. So in Saltillo, you had the sarape being developed. Sarape was really a Saltillo product from the Tlaxcaltecas. They were bringing it from Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala's colors are not as bright as you find in northern Mexico. And the textiles still promoted this color, as well as some of the pottery. This pottery right here is in the archaeology we're doing in Roma, and it shows some of the old pottery that we're accustomed to the area, but it shows that pottery finding its way back into northern Mexico. One of the things too, going back to the Spanish, when Spanish came in Puebla seems to be a place where a lot of the artisans came in, wanted to promote this earthware. It's what's called Talavera. It really started in Talavera, Spain. But what's interesting about it, the people involved in this guild were Spanish. The Indians were not allowed to participate. In the 1580s, they formed a little community around Puebla, and they had set of rules they had to follow in order to make pottery. This case could only be blue and white, and it had to have a certain, they could use some birds in it. And this lasted for hundreds of years, okay? But the indigenous population was not allowed to participate, so therefore this kind of wear was important. It was influenced by the Chinese. There was a lot of trade with China. A lot of the wear looked Chinese, you know? And it was a blue-white. Later on, they got polychromatic and started bringing some more colors until now where you see more of this Talavera work now with different, after 1821, when they said no more rules, this is Mexico, it belongs to everybody, not the Spanish, you can do whatever you want to do, everybody started getting real creative, okay? But before 1821, it's hundreds of years of just the same kind of color. And this kind of color, you know, starts to come out, this polychromatic color, it comes very much in the architecture of Mexico. And I wanted to show you how some of this color came about. This example is a typical, you know, Spanish colonial house in Mexico, and the colors really much promoted there with the color of the stones. You had a red stone, you had a gray stone, and then sorle type of stone that you could have so many stones that you could make that were put in naturally that gave it that color, but still with the idea that it was still a very, you know, conservative looking, you know, building, until they started with the tile, the Talavera tile, which is a Pueblo shot of a very common type of work that you'll find in the Puebla area. That Puebla, of course, mentioned earlier, is known for its Talavera. And this color, which is very polychromatic, which is not the real vivid color, but it's throughout the downtown Puebla. If you've been to Puebla, you can see very much of this type of work. And this is in Tlaxcala. You can see how in Tlaxcala, you also had a lot of that work, and the Indians were also, you know, brought into the idea of promoting this kind of work into their community. The churches, again, during this time, the only ones really doing any kind of architecture was the Spanish, and there wasn't very much of it. In the first 100 years, there was about 3,000 buildings done in Mexico. That's not a whole lot of building when you had 200 or 300, you know, priests that were involved in that process. But you can see that Talavera started taking some shape. More color started getting into the picture, and you had more life into this geometric shape. It's more of a Mudahar, which is an old Islamic type of influence. And in the Mudahar type of architecture, they use geometric forms. The Spanish used figures, and so that was against their principles. But there again, it was something that was influenced and continued throughout. This is a part of northern Mexico, and I really can't see. I can see it better close up. But what you have here, this is Rio Grande River, okay, and you have right in here you have Saltillo, Monterrey, and then you have, this is the San Juan River. Here on this river, this little bend right here, that's Mier, okay. And the reason I'm pointing this part right, there's nothing going on over here, by the way. You know, in the colonial times, forget about it. This part right here, nobody wanted it, you know, in 1700. So this area right here, where the Tlaxcalteca Indians came in, they started to colonize. sort of next generation to the colony over here, next generation, and the path continued to San Antonio. There was a lot of Tlaxcaltecas. Of course, they talk about the Canary Islands. Keep in mind, there was only 25 million Canary Islands. They came in afterwards. They contributed a lot more in Tlaxcaltecas because they were more of a presidio policing type of force that was over there. But they set up Monclova, they set up, all the communities, Lampazos, all these communities were established by this Tlaxcalteca generations after, not the same ones, but after 1600, 1700, kept their language, kept their names, and contributed because they were the architects, they were the priests, they were the government officials, they were the ones that did communities. Spanish, looking for gold and doing ranching. They brought in, they were big cattle people, and they were survivors, they were tough, they're frontiersmen. The log cabin, the Davy Crockett thing, those were those guys. They were out there and they were surviving. They were moving forward and looking for stuff. Whereas the colonizers were making communities and forming the colonies, and were given, as they did that, they prospered. As a matter of fact, the Spanish movement in Mexico was always to the north. So what happens, the biggest pocket of Spanish ended up being a little town named Cerralbo, north. I don't know if you've been to Cerralbo. I mean, if you look at the 1720, 1730 census, there's a concentration, they're more Spanish than in Monterey and Saltillo and every place else. And it shows a pocket. The community sort of held together a lot more. They were sort of isolated there, but they had a different, way of, a different lifestyle, and that there were more survivors, whereas everybody else, the indigenous communities were pretty much working by themselves with a few Spanish population. Matter of fact, Saltillo had grown to a community of Tlaxcaltecas. They were, you had 60, 70%, Tlaxcaltecas in Saltillo, and eventually, overtook it. And so you have a foundation of much of that culture that's coming in. As a matter of fact, that was the first church in the Tlaxcalteca area. It's really interesting. If you study about this, you'll find out the spring is still there. Everything has a pattern, and the pattern, and you ask people today, tell me about these things, they say, well, that's the way it's always been done. Nobody can really answer it. Oh, yeah, that's the way it's done. Why this color? That's the way it's always been done. And even right now, if you go to the different events in the Mexico area, you'll find these Indian costumes during religious ceremonies. And really, they're the old Tlaxcaltecan wear that's been here generation after generation. As a matter of fact, one of their main times and they can't, I've asked a lot of people, why do you have it today, which is September the 3rd, and he says, we've always had it. Well, what it was is when first day they opened up, they had the springs, they got the water, it was life, and they have huge festivities that day because they've always done it that way. No, they did it because that's an anniversary from 1591. But the colors again were something that was introduced during that time. Of course, in northern Mexico, you had, again, what I was mentioning earlier, the ranching. There was a lot of big ranches. You didn't have ranches like this in Mexico, in central Mexico. You didn't have them in Spain. Spain were 200 on a herd. In northern Mexico, it was 2,000, 3,000 a herd. When you have cattle, you don't want people. There was very few people in northern Mexico, and the Spanish controlled the cattle, and the Tlaxcaltecas did more of the agriculture and the small herding. But what you have here, this is a shot of very similar architecture. You're starting to see architecture has a different form, and again, the use of colors. This is in Mina, and it has which is a little bit outside of Monterey. All these communities are pretty much the same kind of cultures that have existed for this period of time. It didn't really change much until this last century. And but you had this colonization that was already taking place in northern Mexico. It wasn't until Escandon came in the 1550s and said, you know what, we're gonna put communities on the river, and so the paths came into this area, and one of the towns I was mentioning earlier is Mier, and you can see that these beams, these again don't have any color, but what I'm showing here, this is Tlaxcalteca churches, what I took at Tlaxcala, and these are Mier churches, very similar, and this is an old document there in the archives that shows Escandon and the three tribes.